It is April 3rd, 2024, and the more that we find out about Israel's massacre of 7 aid workers in Gaza this week, the worse it gets. See, it wasn't just one single strike that hit their car, which notably was clearly marked for the organization that they were with, the World Central Kitchen. It was at least three separate strikes that hit three separate cars, which means that the decision was made by the IDF to carry out one strike to injure the people within that car. Then they moved the injured to a second car to then bomb the second car. And then they moved the injured to the third car to then bomb the third car, to where finally those 7 people were killed. We're finally seeing some international outrage. But the question is always, will any action actually be taken out of this? Will these lives that were taken far too soon, will it all be in vain because the countries that these foreign nationals represented did nothing to stand up to Israel? That is a major lingering question right now. But there's also the question of how Iran is going to respond, as their consulate building in Damascus was destroyed this week by Israel, raising a number of questions about how this will stand to escalate tensions in the region, which seems to be something that Netanyahu is desperate to do. We discussed all of this earlier with a special guest, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Kevork Almassian, a political commentator and founder of Syriana Analysis. Kevork, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
I want to start out by getting your reaction to the latest on this just horrific massacre of at least 7 aid workers in Gaza. Now, initially, when the reports came out, we saw the dead bodies, we saw their passports that they were foreign nationals, and we also saw at least one of the cars from World Central Kitchen that was clearly bombed, clearly targeted. But now reports are revealing that there were actually 3 separate strikes, that the initial strike, it injured individuals in the car. They got into a second car that was bombed. They then got into a third car, and as reports have described it, Israel finished the job with that one. What do you make of this just horrific massacre here, and the fact that from everything we're seeing, it appears to be carried out so incredibly deliberately?
I was reading today about the atrocities that Israel committed in the past 2 weeks, and I came with a few examples, if I may mention them. For example, we watched a video of Israeli drones hunting unarmed Palestinians as if they are flies. Somebody sitting behind the joystick and just killing and hunting unarmed Palestinians. And this video was leaked to the press, right? We watched that. And we also watched a video of Israeli soldiers executing, again, unarmed Palestinians, holding or carrying white flags in their hands. And then they tried to hide their dead bodies beneath the sand using bulldozers. And this was also documented on video. We watched the siege and destruction of the Al-Shifa hospital, which left around 400 dead Palestinians. Many of them were unrecognizable, and their bodies were maimed by bulldozers and armed vehicles. We saw also photos of killed the multinational workers, the aid workers, as you mentioned, and especially those who were working in the food sector. This is a natural development of what Israel has begun to do since the October 7 events. Before that, we know that Gaza Strip was besieged, and Israel used to control what comes in and what comes out, including the food and medication, right? But after the October 7, there is a decision made by the Israeli government, the current one, that they have to go and kill the any lifeline route or any lifeline hope for the Palestinians in Gaza. So even if the Israeli side couldn't achieve its military goals, then the Gaza Strip would be inhabitable for the Palestinians. So they started with, for example, UNRWA, and they made so many false allegations about UNRWA in order to kill the UN refugee organization that is taking care of the Palestinians in Gaza and also around the world, because we have to remember the Gaza Strip, it is overpopulated by refugees. Most of the people in the Gaza Strip are not originally from the Gaza Strip. They are refugees being kicked out from their towns and from their villages, from the surroundings of the Gaza Strip, and since the Nakba in 1948. So they killed this project there. Secondly, they started targeting the hospitals. So they targeted and destroyed the health sector, and now they are targeting the food. So we have these three important factors and the pillars that the Palestinians were laying on and depending on in order to survive and continue living in the Gaza Strip, because they don't have an economy, they don't have factories, they don't have ports, they don't have airports, they cannot do business with anywhere around the world. Basically, it's a big, huge concentration camp where the people live there, and they cannot do any type of relationship and business with the world. So they have completely detached from the rest of the humanity. So what Israel is doing now with these horrific crimes is killing any hope for the Palestinians to stay there, because the Israelis know that their strategic goal, which was to destroy Hamas and other militant groups fighting against Israel, cannot be achieved through military means. And also they realize that Egypt doesn't want to receive 2 million Palestinian refugees. The neighboring countries are not really happy with what Israel is doing there. And as much as this war is prolonged, as much as the opposition to Israel will also grow around the world. Therefore, the Israelis know that they cannot achieve their goals. They have to destroy this lifeline hope for livelihood hopes for the Palestinians there. And that's why they're basically doing everything they can in order to destroy it.
Yeah, it is devastating to watch. And I know that, for months now, as we've seen, the world does not care when Israel kills Palestinians. They've done it on a mass scale. And the fact that they're now taking it a step further, killing foreign nationals who, as you were pointing out there, they're involved in trying to get some sort of a food supply to Palestinians so that they are able to survive, as we have, hundreds of thousands right now on the brink of famine. And yet Israel's not just doing all of this week alone. They are also bombing Syria and have been for a while now. They've launched hundreds of strikes in Syria since the start of the war inside the country. But this week was the first time that Israel bombed a diplomatic mission there, destroying the Iranian consulate building in Damascus, killing multiple generals and officers there. What do you make of this, what feels like it should be a significant escalation, and the reaction to it?
Just before I answer this question, what Israel has done with this food aid organization, it is, in my opinion, it's a targeted strike, and it is deliberate, because this organization coordinates with the Israeli side, and there are former, for example, Marines and former soldiers in the British Army inside this organization, and they were there to support the Palestinian people. However, the Israelis targeted them well knowing that this is the convoy. First of all, there is the logo on it. Secondly, they coordinate with the Israelis before they move. However, there is something called now kill zones in Gaza, and this was revealed by the Haaretz. This is an Israeli paper and not a, let's say, pro-Hamas paper, right? According to many of the reservists and soldiers in Gaza who served in Gaza, there are something called kill zones. And in these kill zones, the Israeli side decides that this zone is a military zone, and anything that comes in this zone could be killed. Anything that is walking and moving can be killed without the approval of the superior. And the question here is, what is the diameters of these kill zones? Nobody knows, because they can pick and choose any area, and they can extend it as much as they want. So it depends on the mood of the soldier. If the soldier is more experienced, maybe it has more self-restraint. If it's a fresh soldier, if it's a junior soldier, for example, there are more chances that this soldier can act and kill, right? So this is all happening in the Gaza Strip. Now, in parallel, Israel is also busy in bombing its neighboring countries. The main reason why Israel is bombing Syria, particularly, because Syria still poses a threat for Israel from their point of view. They wanted to neutralize all the regional powers that can pose a threat to the dominance of Israel in the region. And Israel wants to have an upper hand over the region. Secondly, when Israel bombed Aleppo, for example, before they bombed the embassy mission or the diplomatic mission in Damascus, it has coincidentally, at the same moment, Al-Qaeda was attacking Aleppo, at the same moment. So Israel sent a message to the Syrian side that if you continue supporting the Palestinians or objecting the extermination policy in the Gaza Strip in an effective way, in a tangible way, like the Syrians and the Iranians and the Yemenis and Hezbollah are doing in this regard, then I will strike your frontline forces in Aleppo where you are fighting against Al-Qaeda forces, because remember, Aleppo is on the borders with Idlib, and Idlib is the largest safe haven for Al-Qaeda terrorists in the world. So if Israel bombs and destroys the fortifications and the important military sites in Aleppo, then who is going to attack Aleppo, right? Al-Qaeda terrorists. Number two, when Israel attacked Damascus, this diplomatic mission, this goes against every single international rule, law, norm, call it whatever you want, from the Geneva Convention, from the Vienna Convention, everything. But Israel is a rogue state, and it is supported by the United States. Therefore, there is no official condemnation except by, at the moment, Russia, China, Tunisia, the UAE also condemned it. The rest are silent about it, right? This so-called civilized world in Europe, etc., they are silent about it. And they targeted a consulate which is considered a sovereign territory of Iran, which means that Israel attacked directly Iran, not only Syria, but in parallel also attacked Iran directly and killed a senior IRGC officer or commander who had a crucial role in the Iranian coordination effort in Syria. Now, the goal, as I mentioned, is to provoke Iran to retaliate. So everybody is calling for Iran, those who are pro-Iran or pro-Palestine, calling for Iran to retaliate, right? However, Iran doesn't work that way. Iranian side reacts on a strategic manner. They don't react on emotions. And in their calculations, Iranians are achieving slow but effective advances vis-a-vis the American and the Israeli camp in the region. So if you see the situation in the region, starting from 2003 after the invasion of Iraq up until this moment, Iranian influence actually increased in the region, and Iranians have more leverage over the region than any other power, for example, right? So Iranians see that they don't have to go and rush and go to war against Israel, against a nuclear power, when they are strategically on a long run, they are already winning this battle against the Americans and against the Israelis. Now, if Iran retaliates strongly, let's say, against Israel, which I suspect they will do, if that happens, then the Americans will come with join, right? And this is what the Israelis aim for. They want for the Americans to join this war. They are dragging the Americans into direct conflict in the Middle East. And I think the Americans have to know this. And your audience, I'm sure there are many of them are Americans. They have to understand the seriousness of this issue, that Israel is actually trying to drag their nation into another costly war in the region, and it's a deadly war. It's not like Saddam Hussein was under sanctions for 30 years and his military was already in a junk situation, and then the Americans came and occurred. No, we're speaking about Iran, which has one of the strongest militaries in the region. They have enriched their uranium into maximum levels now after the crumbling of the nuclear talks with Iran. And also it has allies in the region. They have the Yemenis, they have the Iraqi militias, they have the Syrians, they have the Hezbollah. So in every position in the region, the Iranians and their allies can inflict heavy pain to the Americans and also to the global economy. So I think it is not in anyone's interest for this situation to go out of control, except for Israel, because Israel is, as I mentioned, is not achieving its strategic goals in Gaza. Therefore, in my opinion, Netanyahu is desperate to export his internal problems inside Israel into the regional countries by triggering a war that nobody can predict how could it end. And remember, Israel has nuclear weapons, so nobody wants to go into direct war against Israel as well.
Yeah, that is a great point to keep in mind. And I appreciate you bringing up the report about the kill zones that Israel has apparently established. And as you were pointing out, when you have these invisible lines, well, I guess that explains why we're seeing so many videos of Israel just murdering civilians in the street, civilians who clearly either, whether it be a child, whether it be someone with their hands up who clearly is posing no threat, the fact that the IDF is moving forward in the way that they are, that they're killing so many civilians and doing so in broad daylight, it serves as a reminder of what Israel thinks it can get away with, because even with all of this that we're talking about, the US is still doing nothing. You know, the Biden administration, when they're being questioned on this, even some of the most gruesome parts about this killing of the aid workers, you have members of the Biden administration here in press conferences that are just like, oh, well, you know, Israel didn't do this intentionally, right? They believe Netanyahu, or they act like they do, when he claims that this wasn't intentional. And yet, as you were also pointing out there, I mean, it's clear to see, if anyone is really paying attention, that Netanyahu is trying to drag us into war with Iran. And the Biden administration seems to be doing nothing about that. What do you make of the fact that on one hand, yes, the US is going to support Israel always, but on the other hand, they could be looking at a World War III type situation here, and they're just kind of allowing us to slowly, and even in some cases quickly, head to that scenario?
Rachel, if I'm a politician and I'm going to take a decision, like I'm a policymaker, so I put in front of me my national security as an American and my interests in the region, and also the worst case scenario. What could happen if I take this decision or that decision? In this case, it's not in the American interest to go to war in the region. It's not. And it's not also in the American interest to open a wider war, a regional war, or a world war when the Americans are in a huge debt and they are unable to sustain their military effort even in Ukraine. So how could they sustain another large war in the region? This is not in the interest of the United States. Therefore, it always strikes me how these politicians can take such decisions or try to cover up the crimes of the Israelis instead of trying to, let's say, put pressure on the Israeli side, even if behind closed doors. Nowadays, we are speaking, I mean, at the beginning, we always said the United States is complicit with Israel, etc., etc., and the ICJ, they could be considered complicit. Now, I don't think that in April 2024, the United States is only complicit. The United States is partner under the Biden administration with Israel, because the vast majority of the weapons that Israel is dropping over the heads of the Palestinians come from the United States. The diplomatic cover is coming from the United States. The media cover is coming from the United States. And when Israel commits a heinous crime like the ones that I mentioned, and when John Kirby comes, when the U.S. White House spokeswoman comes, and all say the same thing, that Israel is not deliberately killing, then they are partners with them, because everybody can watch the videos, like you see with your own eyes. So they're actually trying to distort objective truth, which is something that we can see with our own eyes. And this is something that is, they're used to do it, in my opinion. So what can the United States do in this regard? The United States has to calculate what's best for the Americans. And what's best for the Americans is to have good relationship with the regional players in the region. And who are the most powerful regional players in the region? You have the Saudis, you have the Emiratis, you have the Iranians, and behind them you have the Syrians, the Lebanese, the Jordanians, etc. The Israelis are the Israelis only bringing headache for the Americans, right? But the American policy in the region was, in the past 40 years, since the Carter Doctrine and later the Bushes, it was always based on destabilizing the region. The Cheney's, for example, the Dick Cheney Doctrine as well. So they wanted to destabilize the region. Now they cannot fathom the fact that the situation has changed in the region, and there are different powers, regional powers and also international powers, having an active role in the region in order to calm the situation down instead of flaring the fires up. But the American side, as an economy, as a military industrial complex, is not used to that. So they're still continuing in the same old policy, expecting different results. But this was probably effective for them, or beneficial for the American industrial complex and the pockets of these elites in 2003. Maximum 2011, 2013. We are in 2024. These people still live like at least a decade back in history, and they cannot really act on the new realities on the ground in the region. So why would the Americans stay in Syria? So what is the strategy of the United States in Syria? Why would they send American troops in harm's way in Syria and then get killed? What is the American national security in Syria? Is Syria posing a national security threat against the United States? The answers are no. So why are they in Syria? Because of Israel, right? So the Americans are actually acting as a protector for the Israelis in the region, instead of trying to bring all sides together and find a solution. Now, I watched the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. He's still repeating the same old tape, calling for a two-state solution, etc., etc. Two-state solution is dead. Everybody knows it. So why is he repeating this same old tape over and over again? The United States is helping Israel to kill the two-state solution, and the United States doesn't have a roadmap for the Palestinians to have a state for themselves. So he is lying to his people and to the leaders of the world with a straight face. But everybody knows nowadays that the Americans are lying to them. Therefore, the Egyptians, when they received the offer from Blinken to receive at least 1 million Palestinians from the Gaza Strip in exchange for economic sentiment, they're going to give them some billions of dollars. The Egyptians rejected that, because everybody can see that after the Ukraine war, that the United States first abandons its allies, and secondly, the United States is no more the superpower that you can rely on for protection or for economic stability, because there are alternatives, and these alternatives are less costly for these regional powers such as Egypt, such as Syria, such as Iran, by relying on the Chinese investment, for example, or the Chinese loans, which comes without political compromises or political preconditions. So why would they go with the Americans in this case, right? So from whichever side you look in the region, the American strategic and national interest lies in having great relationship with the regional countries, including with Israel, but they're only antagonizing most of the people in the region and most of the governments in the region just for the sake of Israel. And this is not understandable from a point of view of a politician which wants to pursue, as I mentioned, the interests of his own people. So the alternative explanation for this is that the United States foreign policy is hijacked. And who is hijacking the foreign policy of the United States? The neocons and the Zionists. So the neocons and the Zionists, they have made this intermarriage 20, 30 years ago between each other. And they are pursuing these deadly policies and destructive policies in the Middle East based on messianic and some crazy ideas that they have to bring an Armageddon to the region. And this is the most anti-Semitic project, by the way, in the world, that these so-called Zionist Christians want to bring an Armageddon to the region and kill most of the Jewish people so that the second coming of the Messiah comes. And this is not like something that is a conspiracy theory. They are telling these things on TV, right? Or just turn any of these theorists, theologians of these Christian Zionists, they are preaching this day and night. And this is, in my opinion, very, very dangerous, because they are the ones who keep telling the people in the Middle East to stay away from religions and say, oh, you're backwards. You still follow a religion that is 14 centuries old. How backward are you? And now when it comes to Israel, they don't have an explanation for what is happening there except for religion itself, right? So put religion aside. What is the explanation of the Christian Zionists for Israel to have the territories of the Palestinians? There is none. It's just the religion, right? So if you put religion aside, they don't have an argument anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting, the hypocrisy there. And as you were bringing up, I know we've been talking about, especially over the last 2 years, about this growing multipolar world and how a lot of what has pushed us to this point has been the United States. I mean, the US interfering with Ukraine for the last decade, pushing Russia to the point where we actually have an ongoing war in Ukraine. And then the US deciding, okay, we're just going to, sanction Russia out of the civilized world. And then that didn't work. And now you have this increasing multipolar world, because as you were pointing out there, other countries that are able to look at the current landscape, they realize, well, why would I want to work with the US when they're just threatening me, when they could turn on me at any point, or when they could treat me the way that they're treating the EU right now, which is acting like we're allies and everything is good, while at the same time destroying their pipelines and harming their economies. Why wouldn't I work with a country like Russia or like China, like the BRICS alliance, where they are actually looking for mutually beneficial agreements? When it comes to the role that now Israel is playing in this growing multipolar world, could we get to the point where it threatens Israel's existence because you have so many other countries, including eventually in the Middle East, that say, well, wait a second, you're becoming the problem here. The rest of us are looking at mutually beneficial agreements and wanting to move forward, work together, and not start World War III.
Actually, the powers in the region, those who are even pro-American or used to be more pro-American, like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, they either normalize relations with Israel or have normalized under the table. Egyptians have normalized relations. The Jordanians have normalized relations. The Moroccans have normalized relations with Israel. There are different visions in the region. Some of them say we have an economic vision. We want to bring peace and stability in the region. And from their perspective, that they can deal with Israel. But the other powers, they say that Israel is a destabilizing force in the region. And see what's happening nowadays in the Gaza Strip. This proves that Israel is not interested in a two-state solution, and they're going to kill the Palestinian cause and occupy our territories and build their temple over Al-Aqsa Mosque, etc., etc. And this is a very sensitive issue for the Islamic world. There you have hundreds of billions of Muslims around the world. So Israel is basically antagonizing billions of people around the world and provoking them, right? So this is not how you can make peace in the region. So there is this argument that Israel is on a self-suicide mission. And I asked this the other day to Alastair Crooke. He is a former MI6, and he said, and I told him, like, it feels to me that Israel knows that it's in an existential threat, and its enemies know that Israel is in an existential threat, but their enemies, the enemies of Israel, are holding the hands of Israel and walking with Israel to the trap. And this is what Israel is doing, basically, because Israel is shooting itself in the leg. It's losing the support of the world. It's losing the support of the public opinion. And also its reputation and image is destroyed beyond repair. There is no way that Israel can convince anyone around the world, except for the hardcore Zionists and the paid shields that we all know, that it's a democracy, right? After all, and also what Israel is doing is very dangerous, because Israel says that I represent the Jewish people and only the Jewish people, and I'm the sole representative of the Jewish people. And when Israel commits these crimes and all these crimes, it is also triggering the real anti-Semites this time to say, look what the Jewish people are doing. Because what Israel is doing is also increasing anti-Semitism around the world, due to the fact that Israel holds this card and says, I represent the Jewish people and I'm doing this in the name of the Jewish people. No, you don't represent the Jewish people. We know thousands and millions of Jews around the world, in the United States, in Russia, in Ukraine, in Syria, in the Middle East. They don't agree with Zionism, and they don't want for the Zionism to continue in this carnage against the Palestinians. And the younger generation, according to many statistics in the United States, the Jewish younger generation, they are opposing Zionism. So all this project of progress, they tried to bring the progressivism to the United States, the wokeism, etc., etc. It was a double-edged sword for them. So it backfired now. So they teach them about social justice, about fighting against racism and all these things. And now all of a sudden the younger Jewish generation says, oh, what is Israel doing? It doesn't represent me. I don't want my name to be stained and my reputation to be tarnished because Israel is doing what it's doing in the Gaza Strip. And I believe that no sane person can now refute the fact that Israel is exterminating the Palestinians. It's killing the Palestinians. They are bodily harming the Palestinians, psychologically harming the Palestinians, and killing any and every hope for the Palestinians to have a statehood, to have a dignified life. Therefore, this is the biggest intent of committing genocide. If anybody wants to understand what genocide means, this is it. When you don't have, the other day when we saw this German journalist asking the UN rapporteur on Palestine, and he asked her, so what is your proof that Israel has the intent? Did you see any written document that the Israelis? It's like, come on, like this journalist, I don't know how they became journalists, and instead of being on the side of the people, they're being on the side of the oppressor, they're being on the side of the aggressor, they're being on the side of people who are truly very, very radical, and they're committing heinous crimes. So I urge also for every journalist with conscience and dignity to speak up for the Palestinians, because what the Israeli government is doing is unacceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. And normally intent is the hardest thing to prove, but in this case, we have so many cases of it that it is overwhelming. Certainly a lot at stake here all around. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down the latest here. Kevork Almassian, a political commentator and founder of Syriana Analysis. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. If you want to support my work, you can also check out my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. That's where you can sign up as a monthly paid subscriber and join the community there. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.